right, we're doing something for the first time, so it's probably not going to be perfect. It is Sunday evening here in Geneva, Switzerland, and I'm actually on something called Clubhouse. It's a new, well, it's not so new now, but it's a relatively new audio app with Karen Watkins, one of the co-founders of the Geneva Learning Foundation. And in just under 3 minutes, we'll be starting a chat on Clubhouse, but we're also sharing it. You can see I'm in sort of Sunday evening mode. For Karen, who's based in the United States, it is afternoon. So wherever you may be, just a warm welcome, good morning, afternoon, or evening. And we'll be starting in 2 minutes and 35 seconds. See you then. We're trying something new. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever the case may be. We're going to do an audio-only chat, really like a kind of radio show. And I'm going to be speaking with Karen Watkins, a co-founder of the Geneva Learning Foundation. Hello, Karen. How are you doing? Are you ready? We're starting in 1 minute, 20 seconds.
I'm ready. I look forward to the conversation.
All right, great. So as you can see, we're all set, and it's you won't be seeing my face once we get started. It'll really be audio only, just like a radio show. Something new. It's a new little app that's sort of become popular in the recent past. It's kind of interesting the way it works. We'll be starting in in just around 50 seconds. See you there. All right, a warm welcome to you. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever the case may be. I'm Reda Sadki from the Geneva Learning Foundation, and it's evening in Geneva, and we're going to be trying something new, something a little different. I'm here with Karen Watkins on a new app called Clubhouse. It's relatively new. It's new for us because we're trying it for the first time, right, Karen? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm enjoying the break and look forward to the conversation.
All right, and we've actually got some folks on who are watching. We're also streaming this out on the Geneva Learning Foundation's platforms, so just YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook. And so I want to say hello back to Abdoulaye Diallo, who's watching from, or actually listening from Facebook. As you can see, you're not going to be seeing our faces, only our voices. And then Dupe Akisanya Orolugbagbe from Lagos, Nigeria, who says it's nice to be here. Jamila Husseini, also from Nigeria. And Robert Ninson, Gambian working in South Sudan. So let's have a round of applause to welcome you all. And then we'll welcome the folks who are listening also in Clubhouse. All right, so let's try this. All right, this is really an experiment. So let's try bringing David and Christopho, and let's see who's in the room. Let me. I'm just inviting them, both of them, to speak. So this is in the little app that we're using. We're going to see if so they can now join us. Christophorus, welcome. How are you doing? And
Hi, Reda. Hey, Kevin. I'm great. Doing great. It's almost morning here. It's 2 a.m. in Indonesia.
oh
Ah,
wow, okay.
wow.
Thank you for staying up. Are you generally a night owl or is this exceptional?
Um, yeah, I'm generally night owl, and I'm still working on things.
I see. Yeah. And what do you do in Indonesia, Christophorus?
I'm I'm a doctor, internist, and vaccinologist, and I'm also uh, the founder of my own clinic. So I founded the in Harmony. It's the first vaccination clinic in Indonesia. Yeah.
Or oh wow, okay.
That's wonderful. That's great.
All right. And let's see. Let's invite David as well. Let's see what and let's get to know David as well. All right. So just to explain for those of you who are just joining, who are wondering what is this? Why aren't we seeing anybody's face or anything? All right. I think Christophorus may be having some issues with his microphone. All right, let's. So just before we meet David, who's just joined us in the, I guess it's the panel, right, Karen? We're this is really an experiment.
That's right. That's right.
We are right. So Abdoulaye Diallo says good evening from Guinea. He's listening in on Facebook, and yeah. So what we're going to do tonight for me, this afternoon for Karen, and then maybe morning for you, is we're gonna chat about learning, leadership, and impact. We have a number of you who actually submitted challenges, and we're going to be looking at some of those. And then we have a number of interesting topics and questions, and we're not going to pretend that we're going to solve yes anything, but we can certainly yes chat about them together, discuss them, and sort of try to apply what we know, what we believe, what we think to the challenges that you've raised. Would you say, Karen, that's about how close is that to what you have in mind for this session?
I think that sounds perfect, and also open to wherever our conversation leads.
All right. And David, how are you doing? Can you tell us where you're connecting from and what are your expectations?
Doing very well. Thanks very much. I'm in the U.S. I'm on the East Coast of the U.S., so it's middle afternoon here, sort of the very best sort of arrangement on a Sunday. But I, at the same time, really appreciate coming in from Indonesia, the middle of the night. My goodness, that's serious commitment. Um, I come at this from over the past couple of decades, having been long-term active in what was called WISIS, the World Summit on the Information Society, which of course is UN set of world leader summits growing there out of Geneva. The focus then, and my focus over this couple of decades, has been preserving democracy, which is always being tested and under serious threat right now. I'm part of something called the Just Net Coalition, which grew out of the WISIS years, based in Bangalore, India, actually. Of course, particularly here in the US, we're being very sorely tried about democracy. I've been quite appreciative of what I've seen of the, and I won't say the name correctly, but the Geneva Learning Foundation.
You got it. That's right.
My goodness. You have put forward some very attractive tools. Really appreciate that. When I saw you were having this chat, it was something I wanted to avail myself. I don't know what I can contribute. I will where I can, but I really quite appreciate. Thanks, and looking forward.
Well, thank you very much indeed, David. Yep, and Karen, can I share a private message? Yes, what interesting people. All right, let's say hello to some of the folks who are following and listening in on Facebook and other platforms and YouTube. So we have Marta Ngoe from Cameroon, Diakite Umar from Ivory Coast, Yungul Jung from Geneva, by way of South Korea, Horace Kondoni from Malawi. Sohini Sanyal is a learning and development specialist from India, works in immunization, but has many other talents. Udoji Danjuma is joining from Kaduna, Nigeria. Kudos to the organizers, he says. And Francis Ibama from Nigeria. Ebrima Eboy Barrow on Facebook says, greetings, hoping for an exciting discussion following, and he is following from Sweden. Halima Toro sends her greetings from Nigeria, connecting from Abuja, and exciting to be part of this great program is what she says. All right, so thank you to those of you who are joining on the Geneva Learning Foundation's social media platforms. Don't be surprised. We're trying something new. Karen Watkins, a co-founder of the foundation, and I are actually on a little audio-only app, and it's called Clubhouse. It's sort of invitation only, which is why we wanted to make sure everyone could listen in. I'll be looking at your comments and sharing them with Karen. What we have in mind, just a few of the topics that we're going to be discussing. We're going to be looking at some of the challenges that you submitted. And then Karen has been thinking about, is learning digitally cognitively different? She's just published an article with her writing companion, Victoria Marsick, on informal and incidental learning in the time of COVID. She actually she's way too modest, so she just shared it with me 5 minutes before we started. We want to talk about what learning looks like on the cusp of chaos, and in particular, what it means to disseminate rapid learning about COVID-19 vaccine introduction. There are also two recent publications from the sort of United Nations system. One is an independent evaluation that was done of the UNHCR, so the High Commission for Refugees, and its learning systems. And then the other was in the World Health Organization, an article about COVID-19 as a driver to revolutionize education for public health. So these are a few of the things that we have in mind here. Again, I want to appreciate Ebede Chinyere Blessing, who just joined from Nigeria, and Barnali Banerjee from Kolkata, India, who is also listening in. So we don't have a formal structured agenda. We wanted to avoid that at all costs. And Karen and I often have very interesting chats, and we thought, well, why not invite others to listen in. So that's as much of an agenda there's going to be. Once you've said hello on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you may be connecting from, share your questions, share your thoughts. That's why we are coming together. Karen, what would you like to start with?
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about learning in the digital era? Since so many people have pivoted to this kind of learning, I think it's worth thinking a little bit about what's different and how do you make it work effectively. I think the work that you do is a hallmark of how to make it work effectively. But I think you approach learning in the digital sphere more from a knowledge creation standpoint and less from a traditional, we're all gonna learn the same thing today. We're all gonna meet this one objective, but rather you capitalize on the cognitive difference that digital learning provides. And what I mean by that is that in a digital sphere, people, my students like to say that we enter into the box. We kind of go inside the box. And when we're inside the box, we see and hear and think differently. It's more complex. I've got all these faces on a Zoom call, or I have all of these voices that I'm listening to in a online class. So there's a kind of multidimensionality to this kind of learning. At the same time that I have tremendous autonomy. So you can be teaching me one thing, but I'm Googling something else. And so I'm enriching the learning all the time. by my independent actions. And so I think what people are learning in this digital pivot is how to take advantage and celebrate that learning difference. And I think where people have done well is when they have gone well beyond that, just taking my traditional class and teaching it this way, to really taking advantage of all of the things that are possible in a digital environment, and also the way in which students themselves navigate and explore and seek out other information, and then bring it to the classroom. So you go from Bob Keegan at Harvard likes to speak about many points of light. That if I talk to you, it's 1 point of light. But if I meet in a group with 3 people, it's 3 points of light. But you put in 250 or 400 or whatever, and suddenly you have many points of light. And that multidimensionality can be both overwhelming and I think fantastic. It really allows for all of us to learn so much more, and in such a richer way than we ever thought possible.
So sorry, Karen, I didn't understand when you said your students go into a box. You're talking like a Zoom call, or these digital spaces are always
going into the computer. They talk about going into the computer as
really?
Going into the box.
Okay, yeah. So we have online from YouTube Brima Barrow, who says TGLF is always innovative. I'm lucky to be part of your learning platform. So Brima, we're also lucky that yes, we've been able to get to know you, and that you've been involved and very committed in the Foundation's program. So if any of you are not familiar with what the Geneva Learning Foundation does, please let me know. And for those of you who are in Clubhouse, you can just raise your hand and we'll pull you into the panel. I think the only reason David and Christopho, I think there's some kind of microphone issue, which is why I just sent you back to the room. But this is an experiment today. It's the first time we're doing anything like this. And yes. All right. Here is Sohini Senal with Sanyal, sorry, with a substantive comment. She's already said hello. It says, one challenge for facilitators is not being able to observe body language. With virtual sessions getting into people's private space like home, it's difficult to insist on having video on. And I'd love to hear, Karen, your thoughts on this, but mine are actually that, it's a question of sort of standpoint, how you think about it, because what I discovered and what I've begun to experience really was like almost a quasi-religious experience of being connected with hundreds of other human beings all across the world, and actually feeling that emotionally as something extremely powerful. And yes, the signals are different, but it turned out, at least for me, that I was able to get a lot more information than I would by observing body language. And a lot of things that were initially hard to read, the more I did these sessions. We've been running now for the last at least 6 years. Like every week we would have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions with 300 or 400 people online. And I say quasi-religious experience because I actually thought, like, I would bet that within 50 or 100 years or something, there will be like entire religious systems built around these kinds of powerful connections by digital means. And on the private space, I think there's a lot of cultural specificity there. But I would say also that actually, like if you're in the call with a boss and with everyone else, or with other learners and the professor, and everyone is sitting in their kitchen, yes, everyone is, it's a kind of equalizer in principle. Of course, if like one person's kitchen is much fancier than somebody else's, we don't want to, that's, so there are definitely issues there, but I think the hardest thing is just negotiating the change. I'll stop here, Karen. Would love to hear your thoughts, and welcome anybody. Ryan, Casimo, Christopho, David, if you want to just jump in, please do.
Yeah, I was sitting there. I empathize with the comment about body language on one level, but on another, on the one hand, we get used to reading body language, But what you have to remember about that is that you're inferring the meaning of that body language. And so Chris Ardress talks about the idea that that's my attribution. It is not what the body language means. So while I think there's tremendous potential for misinterpreting email and things written in a digital space as well, I think the challenge for us, whether it's body language or written communication, is to recognize that we are bringing our own assumptions about what those things mean, and we have to unpack that meaning. So, in a digital space, I try to make things as transparent as possible. If I'm making an assumption, or if I think somebody else is making an assumption, trying to surface it and make it discussable is what we have to do. And when so I think we have to do that at even in a classroom in terms of trying to see their behavior and respond. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but for me, I think the key is, what's the meaning of the body language and who gets to decide. And for me, I want that. If I make an assumption, I'd like to test it with the learner themselves.
Interesting. So, Casimo, you raised your hand. We just pulled you into the panel. We're on Clubhouse. For those of us who just, for those of you who are just joining us, we're trying something new. It's a audio only chat. We are live streaming. So if you're listening on any of our platforms, just so do share your comments as you're listening. Casimo, could you? Right now you're muted, so you will need to unmute, and we'd love to hear a little bit about who you are and what your thoughts are on this this part of the conversation prompted by this comment from Sohini Sanyal, who said, one challenge for facilitators is not being able to observe body language with virtual sessions, getting into people's private space like home. It's difficult to insist on having video on. Are you able to unmute, Casimo?
Yeah, thank you, Rena. Hi, everyone. I am a French speaker, so I don't know.
All right, Casimo, you're breaking up for me. I don't know if it's the same for you, Karen.
Yes, I can't hear it.
All right.
So sorry.
So, Casimo, what I would suggest is if you want to go to to Facebook, for example, and then we'll pull you in. And then we'll pull in your comment. David has, would love to hear from you, David. And you said early on in the intro that you had, so I've just invited you to speak, I think. Yeah. And you said you've been involved in the World Summit for the Information Society, which is a really interesting civil society event, supported or organized by a UN agency, the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. I don't think you fully told us what you do outside of that, but would love to hear what your thoughts are about what's changing. Obviously, one, with the digital age, there was already a kind of tidal wave of digital transformation, and of course, some very interesting and very complex mechanisms, that are ongoing now with the pandemic.
So, just a very brief note about myself. Since I'm going on 80 years old right now, what I do is be that age. But if we look back over the history, you'll find that in midlife, I was an academic actually at MIT, and then later up the river at the Kennedy School at Harvard, where my concerns were then telecoms policy. And as we see, that ultimately became the policy issues at stake at WSIS, where the great struggle was over control, who would have control of the internet. And it became a war which has not been resolved 2 decades, 20 years later, between a group led by the US in the West and a number of others, certainly from the South. As I mentioned, I'm part of a group based in India, and quite a number of others. Actually, the JustNet Coalition is a group of 35 global and regional civil society organizations. Now, hopefully that's context for my suggesting the following comparison. I'm sad that we weren't able to hear Cosimo. I think that probably speaks to the bandwidth issues which lie behind a lot of what we've got to deal with. But if I might make this suggested comparison, back in the WSIS years, not uncommonly after we'd all gotten together in Geneva or Tunis or some other places, we'd have sessions where there'd be a main hall, there would be those in attendance, but then we'd have remote participation. Not uncommonly, I was one of those remote participants. In simple words, remote participants were second-class citizens. No matter how much trouble was taken to try to overcome the disparities, in the end, being in the hall just made a difference in terms of being a part of the dialogue. And of course, therefore, the learning, we have to learn. Now, let's fast forward to what we're talking about today, which is learning on digital platforms. And as Karen has so delightfully outlined all the advantages that it can bring us, I think it's pretty clear that some of those old problems that continue from the days when remote participants were second-class citizens are still there. And I invite us to tease out between those, or put it another way, can we say that somehow or another there was a disjuncture between that era of remote participants being second class and now folks on Zoom? I invite us to try to tease out, and I think Karen was beginning to go there, talking about, for instance, the perceptions of body language. I want to suggest more than that's probably at stake, but I've gone on much too long already. I hope I've invited some
Thanks, David.
some spicy thoughts.
Thanks, David. That's fascinating, and it echoes actually what Marta Ngoe from Facebook. So she is a immunization professional working in Cameroon, and she's connecting on Facebook. And she says another challenge, apart from the private space issue stated by Sohini, is that of connectivity. The bandwidth for her and many of her colleagues is usually too low to carry on with a video while on a call in order to observe the body language. So we speak about what we lose. And Sohini also had a response for you, Karen. She says, it's true, body language is definitely open to interpretation. She also agrees with me that with digital learning, we need to understand new cues to pick up. That to me is the key. I think what we've seen with the pandemic is, in fact, like people trying to replicate, like asking the wrong question being, how am I going to take my workshop, events, work meetings, training initiatives, whatever it is, do them remotely in the same way and then get the same results. Yes, those assumptions just fall apart or become the nightmare of. I recently saw a very highly qualified trainer who's got several books published, and what he's offering, his business literally fell apart in the early days of the pandemic because it was entirely face-to-face. And now he's trying to do the same thing with 4-hour, or I think it's 8-hour Zoom sessions. Yes. And just that misfit of, yes, if you change the medium, then it's not going to be the same. But then it makes me think also that, and this is actually an example, a kind of learning guru put to me a long time ago, which was in the early days of cinema, of movies. What did people do? People went to the theater and they filmed theater. And it took a long time for movie making as its own legitimate form, to evolve and blossom. That took a long time, and I think we're sort of in the steam engine early days of that process when it comes to figuring out how to sort of function in these in these digital spaces. I think the thing also is that the the rate of change, if you think about the industrial era, it takes sort of decades to go from steam to electricity or whatever. And here, of course, we know it's, everything's going a lot faster. And then the interesting thing to think about, and I think Karen has done this recently with in her article with Victoria on informal and incidental learning in the time of COVID-19. And we're living it every day with the work that we're doing, especially with the immunization program that start with courses. I'll read one more comment from Sohini, who says the following: what I really like about TGLF courses is that not only are they executed well digitally, but also how TGLF presents the impact of the trainings in very interesting ways. The data analyses from surveys pull up some very interesting insights. We struggled to show impact in traditional trainings, yet TGLF is doing this very well. I mean, thank you, Sohini. That's much appreciated. You're one of the leaders in not just the courses, but other activities of the program. So it's just, first of all, thank you for the compliment, but would love to hear from Karen. What are her thoughts when she, in response to the different strands of the conversation that are emerging?
Lots of interesting strands to follow up on. I like David's sort of piquing our interest in thinking about the idea of the digital divide. Really, it's about it's not just bandwidth, right? It's you can become second class with just a discomfort with technology. Introverts are writing a lot about how intrusive Zoom feels to them, and so it's a disadvantage to them as well. So there's a dark side to everything. I love the poem by Robert Frost called "The Man with a Hoe," and the poem goes like this: first tool I step on turns into a weapon. And so I think any tool can, has a flip side, right? The secret is trying to take advantage of all of its capacities, so that you are addressing, so things like Clubhouse, trying these things out. Is this a way to reach people who have perhaps a phone connection, but not a strong Wi-Fi, or, whatever? I mean, we have to figure out how to reach more people and, give them that first class learning, and also recognize that for some people, this kind of learning will always feel second class to them because they need face-to-face so clearly. My granddaughter is quite ADHD. She's brilliant, absolutely a genius. But at the same time, she needs to be, she has to be physically active while she's learning. And she needs the oral stimulation of a lecture or a presentation. And she can simultaneously be reading or whatever. But she needs that sort of multimedia impact that you get often in a classroom. And she finds learning digitally, especially the way it's been delivered, which is, just taking the teaching and throwing it online, has not been really useful to her. So I think there's a large body of knowledge emerging right now in this digital pivot about what works and what doesn't, and learning how to really take advantage of the technology, but also overcome some of these downsides, I think, is a tremendous challenge ahead of us.
If I might.
David, we're going to go to the next segment. We'll come back to you. There's certainly a lot to follow up on. We want now to talk about the first challenge that was submitted. It was actually submitted as a success story. So what we did ahead of this event was we asked folks who were interested in joining to share a success story, a lesson learned, a challenge that they would like help with. And we're not pretending we're going to resolve these challenges, but we received some very interesting stories. This one is from Don. He works in a humanitarian organization. He's actually the country director of the organization, and he works in Lebanon. A lot of his organization is focused on children's rights and access to education, in particular for Syrian refugees in the camps inside Lebanon. So here's what he says. we asked him, so first question was, what is the story you'd like to share? And he said, children adapting to digital learning in Lebanon during the COVID-19 period, with the involvement of girls actually increasing because of the use of digital technology. And so he said, digital learning during COVID-19 increases girls' involvement, was how he summarized the kind of headline. So we asked him, why does this story matter? And he said, because most stories are about the challenges and constraints of digital learning rather than the opportunities and positive outcomes. He identified this story through feedback from girls and parents involved in our educational programming, in order to better understand what was going on, with this, with what they had initially observed. His organization evaluated their experience over the period starting in March 2020, and the strategies or solutions that they considered were, how do we improve on this positive experience? And they're actually, we asked him who or what can help you. And his answer was, well, we would benefit from help in disseminating this experience. What lessons have you learned so far? He said digital learning provides new learning opportunities for girls with measurable results in academic achievement. And when we asked him, was there anything that surprised you? We expected to maintain educational outcomes compared to face-to-face. That was the premise, as they had to pivot in a hurry. We were surprised, he says, that outcomes were better and that girls' involvement and achievements increased. Anything else we need to know about your challenge was our final question. And he said, we see addressing the COVID-19 challenges as providing us with new ideas and opportunities for future digital learning. So Karen, we chatted about this, and first of all, neither of us, would claim expertise on the early childhood education. I do know a little bit about the sort of humanitarian context, but we're certainly not going to make pronouncements from that perspective. But would love to hear, Karen. You were just talking about how your daughter has adapted to her learning during the pandemic. When you hear this story shared by Dawn, what are your thoughts?
My first question when I read that was, I wondered what was going on before. And there's a tremendous story here to be learned about gender differences, I think, and what are girls more invisible in a classroom? One wonders. Is there some way in which the digital context has created a more comfortable voice? I did an online program one time. It was all on the computer, not no face, no Zoom, and one of the participants was named Pat, and nobody knew whether Pat was a boy or a girl, woman or man in this case. And what happened was a really interesting set of interactions that eventually Pat commented on, and that she could tell clearly who thought she was a man and who thought she was a woman by the way in which people wrote to her in that class. And so, there is something here in Don's story that would really be fascinating to follow up on.
Yes, indeed. Yep. Ryan has just joined us. Ryan, I think you may have asked a little while ago to join us. So could you introduce yourself? Just go ahead and unmute and let me know. Yeah. Let us know what your thoughts are at this point and what your expectations are as well about this. This is the first time we're doing anything like this. Just a informal chat, no rigid agenda, no panel of experts, just Karen and I chatting and inviting friends and meeting new people as well. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So first, thank you both so much for this Clubhouse room. This has been fantastic. I've just kind of been a fly on the wall so far. I guess just quick background on myself is that I co-founded a company called Eris. So we're essentially a text message learning platform. We essentially just create kind of the software, the backend for teachers, for corporate trainers and educators, all the way from K-12 to workforce education. to build and deploy coursework entirely via SMS and WhatsApp, and soon, learning modalities like Telegram, Slack, and Microsoft Teams. And so the story with teaching Syrian refugees and the story from Lebanon, that was really interesting to hear, because a lot of the outcomes we're seeing as well, the mention was made around more girls engaging in digital learning, and we've seen a lot of use cases for our platform recently with things like, even though again most of what we do is workforce education, with things like teaching potato farmers in India, who I believe 90% of the ones who took our course were women. We've seen similar use cases in Costa Rica, same thing. The majority of the farmers there who took financial literacy courses on ARIST were women, and so it was really fascinating just to see kind of the engagement you talked about there and the gender divide and engagement there. And I think that a lot of like what we've seen driving that is just that, I had spent a few weeks teaching entrepreneurship in Tanzania a few years ago. And by the time they are, age 14, 15, many women are expected to, go back home, and education's not as much of a priority as things like family. And it's a very, patriarchal society, and men are the ones who are expected to kind of finish their schooling. And so I think that it was a great point that was made, because a lot of what we see with digital education helps to bring a lot of equity and accessibility to people all around the world just because of those things. I guess another point I'll make, the reason we actually started teaching via SMS and WhatsApp is because globally, only about 27% of the world has the internet bandwidth to access something like an online course if you use an edX or a Coursera, but about 74% has the ability to access either SMS or WhatsApp. And so when you learn how to go in these different modalities, then something really interesting happens where you open up this entire segment of the world to learning. And I think last quick point I'll make, and then sort of end of monologue here, and I would love to hear both of your thoughts as well, is just there's different types of methods that are emerging, and the education of the future won't just be in person, but it won't just be on Zoom either. It'll be very multimodal. Because for some students, they can only access an SMS or WhatsApp. Some students are spending all day on Twitter or on TikTok. And so we're going to see a whole surge of tools that are kind of the go-between between brand new types of accessing students, and then ways to kind of build that content to make effective learning through those different platforms, whether they're Twitter, TikTok, SMS, or WhatsApp. So I guess that's kind of my high-level thoughts. My question to Karen specifically, but to you as well, Rita, is we would love to just hear how both of you have used a variety of learning methods over the past year, whether it's like Zoom or other less heard of ones, just to increase equity and access, and what kind of results you've seen as a result of doing that.
Thanks, Ryan. So first thing is that's absolutely fascinating. I've been thinking, working with two projects that involve the country of Madagascar, and there are definite connectivity challenges that we don't see in other countries on the African continent there. And I've been wondering, where are the startups that can sort of at least do delivery and maybe sort of offer feedback through text messages. So I'm actually really pleased to meet you. Now, I also have a philosophical disagreement with sort of the folks who focus on the low bandwidth of the segment, and it's the following: it's that should we not be? So we know that the big five, sort of the big tech firms, have huge incentive to get the next billion or 2 billion people online, connected to platforms where they can sell them advertising. So should we, and the rate of change, like how quickly the frontier is receding, where you in the capital city, if you can afford it, you can get 3G or 4G connectivity in most places nowadays. And then it's really sort of a question of how many kilometers do you need to go away from the capital city before that breaks down and you no longer have cell phone towers, and then there's affordability, there's sort of those two things. So should we not be focusing on advocating for the telcos to do what they need to do to keep making money? So there's a conjunction of interest there, rather than trying to adapt, to the reality that probably won't be the same, certainly in 2 to 5 years. I remember meeting amazing engineer, just a brilliant guy from the UK. And he would walk around with this little box, and he had, I think it was either an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi, and had hooked it up so that you could have like a USB sort of storage, little Wi-Fi. You could set up a local Wi-Fi network. It would run on battery, and he was promoting this as saying, well, you can go into a village that barely has electricity and provide, give everybody access to Moodle or whatever. And I think that's wonderful, but I also think if we shouldn't be pushing from the other end to make sure everyone has connectivity. The reality is we're not there yet, but that's just my reaction. Karen?
I can't speak to the connectivity issue because that's not my area, but I love your question about what are we doing to increase equity and access. And workplace learning is where I spend most of my time, thinking as well and writing and research. So, there's lots written and documented that women have, at least in U.S. workplaces, have been disadvantaged in many ways by the digital pivot. And part of that is because while they can work at home and do more and be very productive there, they also have children often that they're schooling and having to pay attention to that, and they bear the largest burden for that. So it really has been very difficult. And then then there's all kinds of other accesses that relate to the technology. I love the idea that you're working with WhatsApp and SMS and trying to reach more people that way. I think that's to be admired. So I think all of us are pondering these questions that have been simply made more visible by the pandemic. They were there before, and it didn't matter as much, to people. There was a whole part of the world that didn't feel like they had to learn anything about going digital. I have colleagues that never wanted to teach online. And now everybody has to. So I think we all have to explore, the questions of equity and access that emerge now, with digital learning.
So we have lots going on the social media platform. So that's related to our discussion. I've been meaning to share. Ebede Chinyere Blessing says, I do believe that digital learning has really helped in building a wider community and network, making it possible to work and interact with many cultures and ideologies. And being able to study at your own pace and time is equally amazing. So she's writing this on Facebook from Nigeria. Sohini responds to Don's story about how refugee girls in Lebanon actually did better. Got better academic results when they had to pivot to remote learning. And she says, Don's story is amazing. Sohini is writing from India. It can be a great idea for rural areas in India too, where few communities are highly orthodox and sometimes teenage girls aren't allowed to go out for studying. Being able to study from home may work very well. Our very own Charlotte from the Geneva Learning Foundation says she really likes the multimodal approach when we think of improving equity and access and really reaching those frontliners who may not have immediate access to connectivity. However, it is also important to upscale and increase accessibility to connectivity. Natalia Guerra Davila says, need to learn to use them. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Natalia. If you want to follow up with another message to let me know. Marta says, advocating for equity and access on connectivity is the way forward. It may seem challenging for the moment, but promising at the same time. David Barra says, in terms from LinkedIn, in terms of the digital cost, there were reports in early lockdown in India that due to the lack of digital access where students were committing suicide as they could not access their learning and they were scared for the future. David adds, one of the issues for teaching online is the ability to assess pupils as well. And David, if you want to tell us who you are as well as, yes, just so we understand where you're coming from, that'd be very, very helpful. I know we have a David in the in the Clubhouse, and who I'm sure has a really interesting follow-up on one or more of the threads of this discussion. David?
So if I can be very brief and reach back actually to Rada's question about where's our emphasis going to be looking forward, I want to say profoundly how much I second the proposition that we must push forward on as much bandwidth as we can, certainly into rural areas. At the same time, I want to say how grateful I am to Ryan and crew for what they're doing to make it happen now. But we must have our eye on bandwidth everywhere. I can tell you, in this supposedly richest country in the world, we're still struggling over whether or not good bandwidth is part of universal service. A second to what you said, Rada. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Ryan, I believe we owe you a response. There's a lot that's been said. What are your thoughts on this? Yes, on the solutions you're able to provide now versus the rate of change. On the sort of big stakes for these massive technology firms.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, no worries at all. I think it's been fascinating just to hear all the different ideas and perspectives there. I specifically really like what Karen said about, like with someone who's spent so much time in workforce learning, having such a focus on different modalities for access there. And, Rita, to your question, I think to David's point too about kind of where do we focus our attention? I think the answer for situations like that can always be both. The reason being that it's different types of resources, of people, of activities that are driving the change behind each one. In terms of like for myself as a 23-year-old recent college graduate in the United States, I'm not sure what my role would be with trying to increase bandwidth. But when we kind of look at the current situation, say, okay, what I do have the skill set to do is go out and raise money for the cause of building tools that will allow better access for what folks have now. And then just based on a lot of the stakeholders that we've worked with abroad, what we've seen is that, for a lot of them, they have some basic bandwidth, they have adoption. But again, when we talk about bandwidth and adoption, of the 7.5 billion people in the world, about 2.5 billion have the internet bandwidth needed for, again, video-based learning. And then another 4 billion have the bandwidth for some sort of messaging approach. And so I think kind of the two things we always think about are that we can either spend a really long time, focusing on getting kind of like last mile bandwidth, last mile delivery to those folks and getting them video bandwidth, which just because of the infrastructure and the cost that would take in many regions to get a gigabit internet, for example, could take years and years, Nigeria being a prime example. Or what we can do is say, look, it's maybe not as great as like a very high bandwidth environment, but there's billions of people who for decades will not have anything better than the access they have on their cell phone. That may or may not change, but the best thing we can do is learning to kind of fit their modalities and fit their needs. And I think the big question there always becomes, okay, but how effective is it, or is it as effective? And just based on a lot of what we've seen around response rates, engagement rates, the frictionlessness of learning in short form and in modalities that are familiar to you, like WhatsApp, we've seen learning outcomes, engagement rates, completion rates of courses that are oftentimes 10 to 15 times higher than traditional learning mediums like video-based learning that are more intensive, just especially for people who are under the age of 25 or 30. So I know that's a lot kind of to unpack at once, but Red, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, that's much appreciated. And again, in very practical terms, I'd love to have a follow-up conversation with you because, like my approach, the first thing I did was I looked at the Starlink website. So this is Elon Musk's project to put up this sort of array of satellites and offer fairly high bandwidth to anybody who will give him the pay the costs. Madagascar is not covered yet. Yes, and just one final sort of thought on this is our response has also been that we've observed that when where there's a will, there's a way. So we've seen participants, learners in our programs, in the immunization program, who the exact same people who are described as, they'll never have access. There's nothing, digital learning will never work for them. And we observed that people were willing to do, quite a lot in order to be able to fully participate. So stories of learners driving hundreds of kilometers in order to submit an assignment. And this is not something, obviously, that we encourage them to do, but this is what they did because they found their intrinsic motivation and solved their own problems, and were able to fully participate as opposed to get a sort of second rate or sort of a lower tier experience. So fully agree. I love, in practical terms, what it sounds like you're doing. And at the same time, I have these sort of philosophical reservations. I want to go to, let me see. So David Barra, we asked, he shared some great comments. So he's the co-founder of We Can Access, a social enterprise whose mission is to enable people to access the world physically, socially, and economically. He's also a senior lecturer of special needs and teaches on a master's program and has students from across the globe. He says the gentleman before who reported about the USA is true, but you also need to have the machines to access the programs, and this comes at a cost. And for some, it is a choice between food and learning. All right. Are there other thoughts that Christophoros is also with us in the Clubhouse on these basically access and equity issues, right? Before we jump into the next challenge, which has to do with pyramid organizational hierarchies. But any final thoughts here before we skip on to the next topic?
Yeah, I would like to say that whatever we do, there's always pro and cons. There's always the double-sided, right? So if we are going to use technology, of course, there's the this bandwidth issue and so on and so forth. But we also have a higher coverage of participants. Like when I created webinars, of course, the engagement from the participants are lower than when they are meeting offline with us. And also the commitment, people come and go to our webinars, right? So of course it's a lower commitment in their side, but when they are committed, I think they also get results as well. Meanwhile, facing these issues, my opinion is that we can also leverage on other technological platform. So online learning can be done using synchronous and asynchronous methods, right? So we can meet live like this, is a synchronous method. Meanwhile, we can also leverage the asynchronous one, the one that we are not meeting at the same time, but actually the teacher provide the material, whether it's video, audio, or text, and the student can do it at their own pace, and the teacher can also assess it later on, and finally give feedbacks to the student. So I think there are ways and methods to optimize the learning outcomes, even though there are obstacles that we are facing. That's my opinion, maybe. Hopefully it gives some insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophoros. All right, we have now, more reactions primarily on Facebook about this discussion, and then we'll jump into how to deal with resistance against peer-supported learning in pyramid organizational hierarchies. So we won't name names, I don't think, but here we go. So let's see what we've got. We've got Frederick Jr., so he's a doctor from Nigeria. He says, equity is achievable only when the decision makers are willing to shift the hidden external influence. Sometimes you hear priority, other times you hear feasibility. Sohini, in big countries, not only is access and equity a challenge, but also a big problem is for us as training designers to be able to find one shoe that will fit all. Different learners have different kinds of access and equity issues. They aren't even homogeneous. So that is Sohini. And then we have Marta and Goe, who says, one thing I like most about TGLF, and most specifically during the peak of the pandemic, immunization professionals, irrespective of their levels, so whether they work in a health facility in the district or in the capital city, saw the importance of learning soft skills, especially digital learning and professional networking. This is really important for this to continue, and one of the ways is through equal access to connectivity. Thank you, Martha, Sohini, Frederick, and David, and Natalia, many others who are sharing their great comments. All right, so now, Karen, did you want to respond to any of those? It's just some fascinating comments coming in. Thank you so much.
I agree. I really appreciate the ideas that people are sharing.
All right, so here we go. Let's call him, well, I can't think of a pseudonym right away, but a gentleman who works in an international organization based in Geneva, a very large humanitarian network, and has a challenge that he needs help with. So his challenge is how to deal with resistance against peer-supported learning in a pyramid organizational hierarchy, and says management segments that feel excluded from peer-supported learning will focus on sabotaging that peer-supported learning. Why does this story matter? The resistance and hesitancy limits the learning transformation of large organizations. And he says he identified this in collaboration with the Geneva Learning Foundation, and is seeking smart practices for dealing with this, meaning practices that have worked elsewhere. I am going to punt that one to Karen Watkins. Karen, would you like to start us? What are your thoughts? You've worked with many, over decades, you've worked with people in all kinds of organizations, studying learning culture and performance, looking at how learning really works, which means not in the formal spaces. And you've heard many, many stories, I'm sure, of management resistance to change in how people learn. So when you hear this this gentleman's story, what comes to your mind?
First of all, I'd love to hear more about the story, because I think this is a really important thing right now. I've been working with Victoria Marsick at Teachers College at Columbia University for over 30 years, thinking about informal and incidental learning. And if you think of this as the primary way people learn, we decided 30 years ago that all of our textbooks really relate to the other 20%, which is related to formal learning, and that it's really important to think about how do people learn informally, and then how can we enhance it. And it's in the enhancing of it that I think the story of resistance occurs. And that, I think, is as we begin to credentialize some of the things that people learn informally, and try to figure out ways to count it. People in traditional hierarchies are used to counting people in seats, or tests that people take, and so the way that formal learning is measured has a long tradition, and whether it's good or bad, it's the way people do things. And in informal learning, and particularly peer learning, so much is happening simultaneously, you can't possibly capture it. So you have to trust the learner, and that trust is a core issue. And this idea that management not only can't see what peers are learning, they can't use it to capitalize in their work. And so how do we make what is learned informally more visible? how do we make transparent, just how much learning is occurring? These are really important questions, and certainly things that, as you know, I've been working on for some time. And the way to measure it is going to require just as non-traditional an approach as the type of learning itself. So it's going to be more qualitative, most likely. It's not going to be a simple test score. We might have to do surveys where we ask people what they learned, and then we have to trust what they say. So that business of, the learning occurs inside the person, and the learner really controls what they learned. They do that in a formal classroom too, but we just give them a test, and then we decide that they know or don't know what it is we expected them to learn. But in a situation like this, where peers are teaching each other just what I need just in time, how on earth can you test all of that? You've got 200 people talking to 200 people, and tremendous amount of learning going on, but you can't capture it, measure it, and control it. And to the extent that managers see their role as doing that, that I think is a significant problem. In our work in trying to think about this, we came up with a model on 7 dimensions of a learning organization. And our belief is that if you create a certain openness and adaptivity in an organizational culture, people are much more likely to see themselves as leaders whose job is to facilitate the learning of their subordinates. If leaders in these contexts saw themselves that way, then I think they would act differently. So when I hear that they are resisting, that sounds, resistance is a kind of control. I feel a need to control what happens in the learning environment, and I can't, because people are off learning together in this individual and mutual way. So developing approaches to help leaders reframe their job, to see them as facilitators of learning themselves and of the learning of their subordinates, to see them in conversation with their subordinates about what did you learn, and also have them notice when people act differently in the workplace because they now know something new. Paying attention and rewarding the learning that people do on their own. All of those things are in the hands of leaders. So I think that our job really is to help them reframe their role relative to learning from control.
So that's beautiful. It's lyrical. What I've wrestled with, as you know, Karen, and you've been following this work quite closely, is that how in a world that's where it should be obvious, the kinds of things you're describing, you described them in the early 1990s. So the sort of early days of the internet, together with Victoria Marsick. When I discovered your work, it's really one of the two sort of key insights that's driven ever since then everything I do. The other insight is around the sort of transmissive learning versus seeing the capacity, seeing learning as having the mission to recognize and support the capacity of people as learning producers. But your key insight was about most of the significant learning in an organization doesn't happen in that training room. It happens through serendipity, through eureka moments, even if you yourself don't use that term. And then to me, once I had that realization, it seemed so obvious, you helped me figure out practical ways to turn those ideas into, like, what can I do as a learning manager, as someone responsible for other people's learning, if I'm no longer trying to prescribe what they should be learning, and if I'm no longer fighting with managers to say, you need to give me your people for 1 day, 2 day, 5 days, and we need to pull them out of work and for them to learn. So that was, and then I saw, then it was difficult to understand, why was there this resistance? Why did managers feel so threatened? And I think what hurt most of all is, why did learning and development people, like specialists, were committed, passionate about training. Why did they become so hostile? I mean, in this case, this person works in a large international organization in Geneva, says that management, that feel excluded from peer-supported learning, focus on, it wasn't just sort of being unfriendly. He uses the word sabotaging, and you've observed, Karen, we may not have exactly the same perspective on it, but, very highly qualified folks with sort of deep experience in training who simply could not wrap their minds around what we are doing or how we're doing it, and ended up being oppositional, outright aggressive, undermining our work. And so how could something that is grounded in evidence, that is actually key to how organizations work, be so threatening to the gatekeepers and to the to management? And I'm not expecting you to have a pre-made answer to that, but what are your thoughts?
Well, nobody votes to eliminate their own job, right? I mean, so if you've built your whole career on doing performance-based training, and this is what you believe in completely, you can see how this is so different. It turns it on its head. So it's a paradigm shift. Personally, I think that a good learning and development program it has both formal and informal. That there is a place for the kinds of things that people are trained to do. You talk about management sabotage, which is certainly a good possibility. There's also the fact that people themselves often feel they haven't learned unless it happens in a classroom. And so a lot of the work that Victoria and I do is to get people to reflect on what they learned. One of the most important things that you ask all the time, Retta, in your work is, what are the lessons learned? What did I learn from this? And many people in our interviews will tell you that, I just realized what I learned when I told you, something like Alice in Wonderland. Sometimes when I hear what I say, I know what I think, because they didn't think of it as learning. It didn't happen in a classroom. It didn't come from a teacher or a textbook, and I didn't get tested on it. So you have a bigger problem than just leadership, that even the people learning themselves have difficulty identifying what they picked up from a peer as learning. I just got a good idea from so and so. They don't think of that as learning.
Yep.
So there's a larger paradigm shift going on.
As you know, Karen, in January 2019, when you did, you performed the first evaluation of our immunization work. And this was a survey that was sent out to all of the alumni. And the survey actually asked them questions, what have you done with your learning? And it turned out that survey actually prompted people to, first of all, sort of reflect on what they had done, and in some cases actually prompted people to action. So yes, they had done a course project that was designed by us to be suitable for implementation, but they simply hadn't considered that, they simply hadn't connected the dots, perhaps because so little of training is actually applicable to work. So even when it's designed that way, it took that prompt from you to get people thinking. And we saw that again, when we launched what we call the Impact Accelerator. So we sent out an email to all the alumni, and we asked a simple question. We said, you developed this project in a formal course. Are you going to do anything with it? Have you done anything with it? What has happened? And that alone sort of sparked people and inspired people to action in truly remarkable ways. I don't have an answer to the question about when how to deal with opposition. I'm even questioning whether common sense actually rules the day in most organizations. The way we've gotten away with it is by working sort of through networks rather than with one organization. And then through the network, you can sort of circumvent all of the gatekeepers, pyramidal hierarchies, but that's not really a solution. It has to kind of circle back to actually challenge those gatekeepers and maybe talk about accountability in learning. So, for example, in immunization, there's a set of people who have been actually quite successful with a sort of conventional approach to learning and development, which is to advocate for spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars on conventional forms of face-to-face training, on cascade training that is known to be, to have severe limitations to its effectiveness, on other things that really have been discredited for a long time by strong evidence, and they kept doing it. They kept prescribing it. They kept requesting funding and obtaining it. And I wonder at some point, if it's sort of what comes around, or chickens coming home to roost, maybe the right expression. And we need to talk about what accountability in learning means. And I know you have a far more kinder and gentler approach, but do you think it's out of the question at some point to say, if as a learning leader you have deliberately prescribed ineffective forms of learning that has been counterproductive, that has been a waste of money, that has not led to measurable results, shouldn't you, at some point, isn't it legitimate to ask you to own up to that? What do you think?
Well, a whole lot of people would have red faces, I suspect, if you ask that question, because of course that's happening all over the world in corporations and everywhere else. So what is effective learning? I mean, that's really where the debate becomes, right? Because other people would argue that what they do that's performance-based is so much, it's more effective and they can prove it. So so the first challenge is to convince people that this is really effective learning. And I wanted to say, this is changing the subject slightly, but when you talk about the Impact Accelerator, I think that one of the most powerful things that you did was that you asked people if they wanted to help each other implement their projects, that you invited them to help one another so that they could increase the impact of what they did. And of course, we both know, because we did that evaluation, that it was phenomenal. Spontaneously, country groups emerged all over the place to help each other, so that you called on people's natural desire to help. And I thought that was, that's the secret here in large measure. But I, that desire to help one another and to help peers, even across country, from one function to another, it's, that's something that we don't tap into in most learning and development situations. And the terrible thing is, if you're heading L&D, that's free. It didn't cost anything to agree to help each other. Yep. And yet people were overwhelmingly interested in doing it. So if your job is building budgets and large multi-million dollar budgets and turning, getting seats in classrooms and all the rest of it, you can just imagine how threatening this is, because it's so grassroots. It's so, each one teach one. So, yep. I think you're up against tradition, but again, the pandemic just might have unearthed some of that rigidity.
Yep. Just one final thought on this, Karen, is Kate O'Brien. So she's a director of immunization, of vaccination at the headquarters of the World Health Organization. And we, ahead of the Teach to Reach Accelerator conference, we interviewed her, and she had a really interesting insight, which was she immediately picked up that the kind of work we're doing, which is about encouraging people basically to believe in their own capacity to learn and change and actually progress towards impact, and that, and thereby contributing to systemic change. And we have, we're building the evidence for that. And there's some things that are interesting enough that it's sparking interest in many quarters. But she said, what you're doing is actually, because it's potentially providing a benefit to everyone in the system, who's going to own it? In the sort of configuration, even though networks and platforms are extremely important in the digital age, we still have organizational units. Sort of conventional learning and development says that the organization is the correct unit of analysis. I actually challenge that and say, well, that doesn't make sense in the digital age. We have to look at networks, but there's sort of two structures superimposed on each other, kind of like tectonic plates between the the established organizations, their hierarchies, their pyramids, their just and then sort of superposed on that, it's kind of like the sort of virtual reality or augmented reality. You have these other possibilities, these new possibilities, connections. For me, the first insight into that, the eye opener was George Siemens' Knowing Knowledge, a book he wrote in 2006 describing how what networks meant for learning, what complexity theory means for learning. So I think that change is going to be hard. Like if you think it's just a matter of putting together the right sort of theory, securing a budget, putting together a proposal. We've discovered to what extent the work that we're doing is just like deeply challenging to, if it's about systemic change, the system doesn't want to change. The system is there to perpetuate and replicate, reproduce itself. So it's going to be hard, and it's about commitment and dedication. What keeps us going is seeing how people in, people in our immunization network, for example, do things because they want to. There are no perks involved. There is no per diem. There is no travel. There is no fancy hotel. So, if they're going to put in the commitment to do one of the courses or participate in the Impact Accelerator, then we have to respect and honor that. And we saw that during the Teach to Reach conference also, where several of the global leaders who spoke in plenary or who were very supportive, and they were supportive because they said it's absolutely amazing when people decide to do something because they want to. And that's kind of absurd, because why would people do anything else? But in training and learning and development, it feels to me like we've done so much to sort of prescribe and have backed ourselves into a corner, and that corner doesn't, is not a comfortable place. So even though it may be difficult for us, dealing with managers who will go as far as sabotaging, as we heard in this testimonial, I think it's actually more difficult for those managers. They must feel really, really threatened and must feel terrible. So that's a bit of a rant, and there are also comments piling up. But Karen or anybody else, Ryan, David, Christophorus, and then we'll go to the comments, and then we'll go to Allison's testimonial, a challenge that she needs help with. Karen?
So Ryan, do you want? Sorry,
Yep.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, David. Go ahead, David.
Sure, go ahead, David.
So there leapt to my mind at the first description of the challenge, the obvious answer: co-opt those leaders who are sabotaging, and to try to build on the colloquy we've just immensely enjoyed, frankly, just gone on now. Karen pointed at the culture. Clearly, that's where there is in place the now traditions that allow managers to take these very hardened positions you're describing, Rena, and also, therefore, where the levers have to be that create the possibility for what Karen pointed at. That's to say, co-optation would take the form of empowering the leaders to encourage their subordinates to build on this informal learning. Now, that's not an answer, because we know that culture change is the whole bloody problem. Still, I'd like to think you have revealed in what you said the outlines here. Enough.
Thanks, David. Ryan?
Sure. I guess just quick thoughts too. There is on the first point about kind of the measuring the efficacy of learning. I think Karen and Rita, you both had some really fascinating points there. And I think one thing we've seen work really well is actually building just moments of action reflection into courses. And so with our courses, we like to say, hey, for most subjects, there's a 90% learning, 10% action. What would it look like if we made that more of a 50-50 balance? And so often on every course segment or module or day, there's some sort of action that someone has to go take. And then there's moments of reflection work throughout to kind of text back. And so that surveying that you talked about, Rita, that's usually so effective. I think integrating that into the learning itself, and then consistent check-ins has been one way we've seen, the best measurements we can get of things like behavior change, which obviously is an effective outcome for a lot of learning. I think one thing we've seen too, we'll go in and bring in something, kind of these brand new sort of learning tools into Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that are known for being slower, more traditional in kind of their approach to these problems. And we've definitely seen the problem where managers sort of raise their hand and they say, I don't like this. And I think one thing we found to be pretty effective is kind of this whole series of manager education just around how do these tools essentially help you do your job better rather than replace you. And so I know there were a lot of instances where initially folks were really skeptical. And then what we kind of ended up describing it as and actually seeing play out in real time was to say, hey, look, your biggest issue right now as a learning leader is that it's really hard for you to get budget, to get buy-in, because it's really hard for you to actually measure these learning outcomes. If you switch to these types of tools, it's very easy for you to realize what kind of outcomes you're getting, and then to, or you can get a lot more visibility into it, at least to say, and then it's much easier for you to go and, show your boss, A, here's how I'm doing my job well, and B, here's why we should increase our budget because it's, X, Y, or Z effective. A good example being that, this year we saw a huge surge in courses built on diversity and inclusion, and we were able to measure really substantive behavior change through, a variety of coursework, and then measuring that through things like having employees take actions, have discussions, having moments of reflection over a 20, 30-day period, and things of that nature. And so I think all very interesting problems. I unfortunately do have to hop off in a minute, but Karen and Rita and David, I just want to thank you all for your really fascinating comments and for letting me join up here. This has been a really fascinating discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Ryan. All right, let's go to the next.
Thank you for joining us.
The next challenge, it's Allison who needs help, she says, or that was the option she selected. So Allison belongs to a network-style organization, not federated, and therefore existing within a spirit of cooperation rather than compulsion. That's already very interesting. As such, our digital data collection practice and infrastructure is different across the network, she says, as is buy-in, reporting, etc. The COVID pandemic brought us forward in our quest to help show the importance of data, building buy-in, but we still got a long way to go to have in place an infrastructure which puts the insight from data into the hands of decision makers, often at field level and in technologically challenging situations. So if she were to summarize this challenge in a single sentence, here it is: bringing a single digital infrastructure for data collection across a global network. Why does this matter? Well, data informs decisions, she says, and the more accurate it is, the quicker the analysis, the better the access to it will strengthen these decisions. And it's a current problem that she's facing, so this is not a hypothetical. And what has she done to learn more about it? She's drawn on past experience, spoken to corporates, and now reaching out to those who may be or have been in a similar situation. And then strategies or solutions that she's tried or would consider. And she says very pragmatically, we would consider anything against feasibility, scalability, and cost. And who or what can or did help Allison, and the insights from others who have gone through a similar situation or have contacts which might help us. All right. So while Karen, you think about that one, let me go through, just share a few of the comments that came in our previous discussion. I actually should have done that first. Bede Chinieri Blessing says, peer learning is really not being preached in major organizations. One of the major challenges I have been dealing with is getting most OICs to build the capacities of their subordinates. Most times grounding the facilities and its activities to the ground whenever they're not around, with absolutely no one to take responsibility. Amel has a comment about Teach to Reach. So this is the Foundation's flagship program, really about transforming immunization learning. And she says it's a platform that's really built up our confidence and professional experiences to reach every child through immunization. And Sohini says one challenge that she sees in peer-to-peer learning is that learners sometimes tend to gravitate towards caring, nurturing peers for learning, rather than those who may be brusque, but who could have better expertise. So those are the comments coming in. I'm sorry, I should have flipped that order, but to go back to Allison's challenge, how to bring a single digital infrastructure for data collection across a global network. My first question to Karen, do you consider this is a learning problem or not?
That's an interesting first question, isn't it? I'm not sure it's a really, she has to learn her way to solve it, of course. But I think at the end of the day, it's not about learning. It is about, I'm actually thinking about the innovation incubator that you created and how difficult it was to have so many different ideas. And then how do you analyze across that and categorize? And, so there's a place here for AI in my mind in responding to her. If this is not a learning problem, I don't think that you can use learning to solve it. But it sounds to also like they have a problem of different platforms, that they don't have a common way. They're collecting data digitally, but across a network. But it sounded like she didn't have an infrastructure that pooled the data.
Yep.
So that sounds like a technology issue to me. But then also AI. I just was learning about something called House Space, which is a group facilitation tool that was incredible, and it actually uses AI to summarize the work in groups that people do.
Right.
So maybe there's some solution here that she could look at, is what I guess I'm saying.
So Allison says she submitted this because I felt that it was about the value of learning. And Karen, I am very pleased to formally and officially disagree with you. I think that,
good.
I think doesn't happen very often. So I actually like if there is a like the in the new paradigm, this is like the learning problem that, if you think that sort of the flow of knowledge is like the new oil, what Allison's trying to do is actually, that learning comes through the network. Then what she's doing is absolutely about figuring out how to get the quality of the know-how, not so much the know what, but the know where. Where do you find the information? If you're in this distributed organization that everyone has sort of pieces of it, if you actually want to improve learning, then you need to figure out how to strengthen those connections, how you actually build them and have their value recognized. So I actually don't think what we're saying is that different, but I'm just happy to be disagreeing with you.
Why not?
May I notice?
Yes, please, David.
I think this could be usefully categorized as the challenge of the hierarchy against the network. Of course, that was a topic in the prior segment, obviously clear when we talked about a hierarchical organization, and you then overlaid the fact that socially it's actually a network with many nodes. Clearly, Allison needs her network to reach out and touch all those points around the globe. But she also needs the hierarchy to regularize and bring it all together so that it becomes a growing larger and larger stream. Not suggesting an answer, but rather a framework for understanding the challenge that we need actually both.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can draw a parallel. Thanks, David. I think I can draw a parallel to some of the challenges we're facing. And I just shared this morning a little article about disseminating rapid learning about COVID-19 vaccine introduction. So this is, the network developed by immunization professionals that we've been supporting in various ways. And it's not a network style organization yet, even though it has some characteristics of it. And what's peculiar is that, in a way, we're providing the single digital infrastructure for data collection across this global network. But that's because we we built it from scratch. We built it with the folks involved, but actually, we are the ones who can, who are centralizing the data. We are the ones. So we just issued a questionnaire following an event that we did on Friday. In the January, we put out what we called the COVID-19 Peer Hub Pulse Survey and collected 3,200 responses. By contrast, the World Health Organization, working with a number of its partners, did a pulse survey in, I believe it was May or June of 2020, and had less than 300 responses. So a tiny Geneva-based organization was able to, through its digital infrastructure for data collection, collect 10 times more information, context-specific, detailed, across developing countries about the impact of the pandemic. And so when I think about Alison's challenge, how you would lead the change, maybe there's an opportunity in people not recognizing the high value. So one of the things we did was we were able to build the network because nobody thought that it mattered, like being able to basically build the mailing list. Yes, nobody recognized the potential value of that. And our platform is now 100 times bigger than our closest competitor, in quotes, because obviously we're also cooperating and collaborating in various ways. So maybe looking for things that nobody considers important and recognizing and sort of starting to build the digital infrastructure there. That's one thought. The other way would be to look at it as really a digital transformation project. So if you look at whether it's newspapers, music industry, whatever, when something is sort of small, not everybody understands or recognizes its value, it's easier to advocate, well, let's set up a little digital infrastructure data collection unit, and nobody pays attention because it doesn't seem to matter. And the people who believe in the potential, or at least believe it's worth exploring that potential, can then say, well, all right, we'll just do this in our little corner, don't worry about us, and build something that can sort of plug into across the network style organization. Other things would be to look for, obviously, to look for champions, build alliances, supporters. We're still struggling with, demonstrating truly demonstrating the value, like the impact of having that single digital infrastructure for data collection across a global network. I'll stop here. There's a great comment from, let's look at Sohini's comment. Alison's question is interesting. She says, if we knowledge management systems in a certain way for traditional training events, surely knowledge management tools too now need to change with learning pivoting towards digital learning. Okay. Thanks, Sohini. Any further thoughts or comments on this issue of bringing that single digital infrastructure for data collection across a diverse distributed network?
I noticed that the case you presented has intention, tiny little rivulets building one by one individually at the very same time that there is some sort of framework, some sort of overarching that allows these two pieces to operate, let me say it, in tension. And it seems that you've demonstrated that it's very successful if you can tolerate those two opposites together.
Yeah, in a way, it goes back to like these. You have these two like these two superimposed, things, structures on top of each other, figuring out how to, get them to complement each other, or does one, ultimately, override the other? Maybe an open question, but Karen, any final or further thoughts on this?
I'm good. I think in many ways this is outside my wheelhouse. So.
All right. All right. Okay. Alison says, "Thank you. Really helpful." Okay. Again, we're not going to pretend we're going to come up in this type of dialogue with solutions, but certainly thinking together and thinking in this connected way. We're connecting people, obviously, from learners, alumni of the Geneva Learning Foundation, but also many others who don't know us and who haven't formally engaged with us, and we're happy to do that. That's really the spirit of innovation, of learning and change that we're trying to promote. Now, I'd like to shift with Karen's permission. We wanted to talk about two items from the world of international organizations and specifically UN agencies. Karen, would it be okay to talk about the article from the World Health Organization and then the independent evaluation of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees learning systems? So, and on both of these, so Gaia Gamuage from the who is principal author of this article in the Weekly Epidemiological Record. The article is called "COVID-19 as a Driver to Revolutionize Education for Public Health." Really interesting. The first time in the WER, to my knowledge, that there's been a formulation about digital learning, something something formal, well researched and well thought out. I have a quote from that I want to share that we can that would be interesting to discuss. And then the other item is the evaluation of UNHCR's learning systems. So this is one of the largest UN agencies, and they set up, I don't know how long ago it is, the Global Learning Center based in Budapest, and to try to centralize and coordinate all of the learning activities of the UNHCR. Very interesting organization, very large, and there's the UNHCR commissioned an evaluation initially of the Global Learning Center. Catherine Russ, dear friend and colleague, was one of the people who led that independent evaluation team. I've had a couple of chats, and maybe if we do this again, Karen, we should certainly invite her to hear firsthand. But there's a really interesting in the key findings. So in the executive summary of this independent evaluation of UNHCR's learning systems, there's a really interesting finding that I absolutely wanted to share with you, Karen, and hear your thoughts about. So which would you like to start with, WHO or UNHCR?
Let's start with WHO.
All right. So the article is COVID-19 as a driver to revolutionize education for public health. So it's not every day that you see a United Nations agency that talks about revolutionizing education. So that already to me sparked my interest. I'm going to read the paragraph. So the purpose of the strategy is to create a culture that redefines and creates a norm for LLL, so lifelong learning, for meeting the public health goals of individuals, communities, countries, and the world. Incrementally and proactively remove barriers to learning and promote excellence in learning for improving people's health based on the most effective educational standards in science. It draws on adult learning science, behavioral sciences, neuroscience, and other disciplines. It will harness rapidly evolving digital technology, which is revolutionizing education, and it will build on lessons learned in the dramatic developments of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns that have made digital platforms more accessible and familiar to people. Karen, when you hear that, what's your reaction?
I love it. Actually, I think it says what we know, that good digital learning draws on adult learning. It does all of the things that they're talking about, and I think it also suggests that we won't turn back. That what we have learned in this digital pivot are strategies to make education better for everyone. So I think the digital platforms are here to stay. They've become much more familiar, as the authors say, and I think that they're setting the stage for a major focus on digital education in the public health sector.
So here's the rub. When you go to the Open WHO platform, what is actually being offered in terms of learning is PowerPoint slide decks being read literally, yes, by technical experts from the World Health Organization, with a quiz testing recall at the end, and how do you reconcile what is actually being operationalized, done, which is what we know is one of the least effective forms of digital learning. What health workers need in today's complex world is not the ability to recall information, which is the best you can hope for from those sort of knowledge modules where you click through PowerPoints, you listen to somebody reading them, and then you get a quiz at the end. And so to me, there's a real disconnect, and I see this happening in many sort of different learning contexts, is people who have the concepts, the vocabulary, who have looked at the right evidence, and there's just this chasm between between what they say they want to do and what they are actually doing. So 2 questions for you, Karen. First one is, do you agree or disagree that there's a disconnect between the two? And second question, if there is, how do we cross that chasm? What kinds of things could help the folks at WHO who are currently doing the least effective form of digital learning? We know this from evidence from decades, yes, that the outcomes are going to be extremely limited. How do they go from here to this beautiful vision expressed about this driver to revolutionize education for public health?
Well, there's many a gap between cup and lip, right? Our espoused theories and our theories in use are often different. And I think one of the things we have to do is to hold a light up to those differences. The idea of creating a culture of lifelong learning and making learning more accessible, removing barriers to learning. That, like you said, that is a very powerful vision, and one that I think most people in the World Health Organizations or in the public health sector would embrace. They're not going to embrace bad practice, right? So I think they're going to get pretty negative feedback. And you just existing where you are hold a light up because you do something different, and it's highly likely that learners are going to rebel. I would hope they do.
Well, so that's not, in my experience, what happens. And I started with digital learning at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, the IFRC, many, many years ago now. And it was the Human Resources Department. There's a guy in HR who had purchased a learning management system, probably one of the worst corporate learning management systems you can find. And they developed the first sort of e-learning module was 500 slides of information about the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Just the worst, the worst you can imagine. Absolutely not mindful of any adult learning principles. And here's the rub. It was a huge success. The IFRC learning platform became the fastest growing digital system, with the worst kind of e-learning and a learning platform that was super difficult to use. And I really struggled with reconciling that and realized that I think if you think of it in terms of a change process, so like in the past, that Red Cross, Red Crescent experience is a brick and mortar experience. So anywhere in the world, you're likely to find a branch office of the Red Cross or the Red Crescent from your country. What do you find at the branch? You find opportunities to learn. You want to learn first aid, you want to learn how to recover from a disaster or how to prevent the next one. And it's actually peer learning. It's likely that the trainer is going to be someone from your community, someone who is just like you. And I realized that so I thought, well, how do people go from there to the digital space? And I realized that the fact of being able to sort of connect your very personal, intimate, and powerful Red Cross, Red Crescent experience, and all of a sudden finding something that speaks to that in the digital space, was so powerful that it didn't matter how good or bad it was, that the criteria for quality or like the quality of the experience you were going to have of it didn't matter on those formal adult learning principles. And I think it's actually the same dynamic that's happening with this open WHO platform from the World Health Organization. It's horrible. Like even the quality of the audio of the technical officers reading the slides is bad. All right, in 2021, from my perspective, that's not acceptable. Like, yes, but it's quick to develop. It's cheap, and I think for that health worker who can from anywhere in the world now access, even if it's a boring technical expert droning on about their technical topic, it can be mind blowing. That is that. What do you think? Could that be enough to revolutionize education for public health, or is that the starting point?
Well, everybody has to start somewhere, and I think that it is not at all uncommon that people replicate a classroom approach when they start out digitally. But I was thinking about your IFRC example. First of all, what did it replace? And so as you think that, you were giving an example of the training at the local level. Well, a lot of what it replaced also was that people had to fly somewhere to be, to be in the same space. And so there was a great interruption in their lives in order to reach and be part of that global network. So that's one thing. What are we replacing? And if what we replace is, I had nothing before. I had no contact. Now I have contact with this mission center. That would make a difference. And then the other is, was it mandatory? To what extent could I voluntarily watch it, or was I required to watch it? And that really affects how people feel about it as well. So, there's, Herb, well, not Herb Shepard, but Simon talks about the notion that you can't get there from here. That there's this idea that, every organization has some starting place in digital education, and whatever that starting place is, and there he's really talking about the culture. That if we're in a culture that is hierarchical and really slow to move, highly bureaucratic, it's going to adopt things very slowly. It's not going to be. I have a dog that's growling right now. Sorry.
That's okay.
At any rate, it's just not going to be the same process as if you introduce a technology at Apple, where people are tech savvy and
right.
Kind of ready to move. So I think what you're talking about is an organization that is fairly bureaucratic, that is moving in this direction, and they're going to take baby steps. And you on the other hand have been taking giant leaps for mankind and womankind as well, in the technology sphere. So of course it's going to look antiquated, but I think this is just, this is the natural evolution.
Right. So one of the questions for me is, how do we accelerate that evolution?
Yes,
Can we wait?
Exactly.
And because we know what's going to happen is that, sooner or later, those, e-learning modules that are about transmitting information, and testing, assessed by the ability to recall information, their ineffectiveness, the lack of results, the results that they will fail to produce will become apparent. Do we have to wait? How long do we have to wait for that? Yes. What can we learn from experiences of the past? It's not the same. My experience was over a decade ago at the IFRC. Is it acceptable to be going through that same cycle when we know what's going to happen? We can predict it. Yes, with some confidence. Is that acceptable in today's world? Those are the kinds of questions. And how can change agents or people who see the need to accelerate progress or towards this revolution in education for public health, what can we do that's likely to be effective? versus things that will just generate opposition and lead, as we heard in one testimonial, management to sabotage. So that's where I found this evaluation by an independent evaluation team of UNHCR's learning systems. It started out as an evaluation initially of the Global Learning Center. And it's the evaluation team, it seems, that actually came back and said, we can't just evaluate the Global Learning Center. We have to evaluate learning across UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, one of the largest UN United Nations agencies. And these evaluators, I'm hoping we'll get one of them into the next chat if, Karen, you and I decide to do another one. And so there's some key findings. There's a report now that is publicly available. We'll share the link in the Telegram group as well as to the WHO article. And key findings is super interesting. There's just one phrase, and maybe this is a perfect way to end this first chat. Here it is. Let me see. To achieve the transformation in knowledge development and skill acquisition that is necessary to create a high-performing organization, it is essential that UNHCR's dominant mental model of training is challenged and reframed. This is not just a task of providing alternative learning mechanisms. A new understanding of learning has to be promoted at all levels of the organization in addition to new services provided. So this is a formal report by a team of evaluators that carried out, I think the evaluation took nearly 2 years. It was an intensive process. This is one of the key findings. So I have two questions for you, Karen. One is, what do you think the potential of such a finding can be for the organization? What is the opportunity? And then the second question is much harder. If there is an opportunity, and once you've described to us what it is from your perspective, what should the organization do? What should be the action taken by UNHCR to promote a new understanding of learning at all levels of the organization, in addition to new services provided? The most ironic outcome I can imagine would be UNHCR organizes a formal training, mandatory, prescribed for all staff, teaching them how they should have a new understanding of learning at all levels of the organization. What do you think?
Well, I think the notion that the way they were training now was inappropriate as a starting point is really interesting, and that they have to reframe their understanding of learning and how it's delivered is very, very powerful. And certainly that's the kind of work that we've been engaged in for 30 years, is just really trying to get people to understand that learning is lifelong. It's it's ubiquitous. It is something that can be facilitated in a host of different ways, and that many of the behavioral paradigms that dominate are not very helpful in a complex culture. So I think that the message they're trying to give is very, very, very important, and that it is about reframing the mental models through which training is created. And I also like the fact that they mentioned all levels of the organization, because, as you know,
Yep.
We're quite convinced that it's in the culture. It is. If you want to create a culture that emphasizes learning, you have to work at all levels and help particularly the people who make decisions to see learning differently and to embrace a broader range of options for how people learn.
So, Karen, if you were the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Learning Center in Budapest or the Secretary General of the UNHCR, and you receive this report that says, you don't just need to provide alternative learning mechanisms, you need to promote a new understanding of learning that has to be promoted at all levels of the organization, in addition to new services provided. What would you do? What would be your first action to kick off that broad and deep change that is being called for by this evaluation team?
It's hard to say. I mean, I don't really know that organization well enough, but I certainly think that, I mean, their notion that it's learning opportunities versus training programs. That I think that you meet with leaders and others and talk about what does that mean, and what does that mean in this context? What learning opportunities are people taking advantage of? Let's do some benchmarking and figure out what people have already found on their own, and and then encourage it. Take that flame and make it a fire. So I think you have to kind of inventory what learning opportunities exist or could exist in the context we're in Budapest or wherever. And then, but at the same time, in doing that, you're trying to coach and mentor your own leaders so that they begin to think learning opportunity versus training.
Yeah,
I think I'd start there, because I think that's the easiest way to get at, rather than a bunch of definitions of learning or whatever.
And
what is a learning opportunity, and what do we have now?
I gotta say that I know that's a trick question, especially the way I formulated it, because you have taught me one of the many things that I have learned with you, from you, is to have this advisory role, to be the sort of Robin to the Batman decision, making the decisions, to accept that maybe Batman is not ready to go, to make certain decisions, and to live with that. And so putting you, I deliberately wanted to see how you would respond to being put, you are the senior decision maker, you're no longer the advisor. And do you think that learning leaders should be, in that decision-making role, or are we either condemned or blessed, to be in this advisory role of facilitating change, supporting change, fostering it, encouraging it, without ever really being able to say, okay, let's make change happen?
Should the chief learning officer be at the table? Is that the question, really?
Yeah, that's certainly one way.
They should be, and many times they are.
Right.
They do get to make these decisions, but I as much as I do believe that they should be at the decision making table, I also think that they'll never be successful if they haven't changed the mental model of the people they serve. Their clients are the other leaders in the organization. So you can't work only on the you can't preach to the choir, if you will. The chief learning officer ought to get all of this at this point. But how do they get other people to accept it? Well, I think their job is to get to begin reshaping people's thinking. How do we influence mental models? Well, it's not just persuasion, it's also an educative task, a coaching task.
Thank you so much, Karen, and as well as David and Christoforos, who are still with us. There's still Anuo Luwapo Papula, who's watching from Nigeria. We had Nigerians were strongly present for this chat about learning. It's the first time we've done anything like this at the Geneva Learning Foundation, but I've actually been wanting to do this for a long time. Karen and I have many just fascinating discussions, chats, and I always wondered, well, shouldn't we be having this, inviting other folks who want to join? So thank you to those of you who were able to join. If you joined partway or you want to catch up, well, the good news is that the recording is instantly available on our social media platform. So that's on Facebook. Just look for the Geneva Learning Foundation. Then we also have on YouTube. Look for the Geneva Learning Foundation. On LinkedIn, the same on Twitter. We're Digital Scholar X. So that is, I think, a wrap for tonight. But I do want to leave the final word to Karen. And my final trick question is, Karen, should we do this again?
Well, why not? It was fun.
All right. All right, let's have a round of applause, because if we were in a shared physical space, I think we would feel a different kind of emotion that has something to do with what human beings or what a crowd can do to make noise. And these are the kinds of things we think about. Evelina Jeleniowskien. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing your name. Sorry about that. Thangu says thank you. Thank you, Evelina, for being with us. Would love to see your comments. And if you are still listening on Facebook, do let me know if you think we should do this again. Put a thumbs up or a like or a heart, whatever seems appropriate to you. That can be that can let us know, signal us. We can't do body language. If you fall asleep, obviously, then we've kind of failed to achieve our objective. But I hope that's not the case. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I hope it's been useful in some small but significant way. I love the contributions from David, Christophoros, and others who were able to join us in the Clubhouse. And of course, the fact that most people were not able to join on Clubhouse says something about the inequity and access issues we've been discussing. Take care. Wishing you a pleasant evening if you're in Europe or most parts of Africa. Hopefully you're already asleep if you're in Asia. And for those of you in the US, wishing you a pleasant Sunday evening or other parts of the Americas as well. All right. SM says, bravo. We want such events again and again. Alison McNulty gives us a thumbs up. I don't know if that means she would come back next time. And Nabrima Barrow says thank you. So yes, do put in send us the signals so we can decide if we should do this again. And if you have any suggestions for improvements, we'll be asking you for feedback as well very soon. Thank you and good night or good.
Thank you, Reda.
Yeah.
Thank you, David and Christopher.
Thank
Glad
you,
that you could
Reda.
join us.
Morning here from. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, David.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Very